Hi guys, I'm Shmee. Hello and welcome back to the channel. You join me today here at the Shmeemuseum, having pulled a couple of the cars over to this side for probably the most unusual back-to-back test drive I think you will ever see. I've picked these three cars that represent three totally different eras of my car ownership experiences. A bit of a walk down memory lane, you could say, with the Renault Clio that I recently purchased, an identical car to the first car I ever owned when I was 17, wearing the same registration plate as well. Then my Aston Martin V8 Vantage Roadster, the first ever Shmeemobile on the channel that I reacquired a couple of months ago, having last seen it nearly 10 years prior, wearing again the same plate I had on the car back at the time. And of course the ultimate Shmeemobile, the McLaren Senna, the ultimate in terms of performance, price and many more characteristics. Three cars which go from silver through glacial blue, quite literally, towards the cerulean blue of the Senna. Well, we're going to go out for a drive in these three cars. As I said, a walk down memory lane, you could say. First the Clio, then the Vantage, then the Senna. Let's go check them out. It is quite the quirky trio that we have lined up here then, and I think I can confidently state that this will be the first time ever that a McLaren Senna has been in the same group test as a Mark II Clio, or even an older generation Vantage Roadster for that matter. But three cars out of all of the Shmeemobiles that represent, as I said, three totally different periods of my car ownership life, and that's why today I want to drive them one after the other. Three, I think I can say, very significant cars for their respective times, and three very different cars as well. Hatchback, convertible Grand Tourer, mid-engine track-focused supercar. But the Clio I picked up a couple of days ago. This is an identical car to the car that I owned when I was 17 years old. It's a 1.2 Dynamique, a three-door in silver. It has a whopping 72 brake horsepower, four-cylinder engine, front-wheel drive, manual gearbox, and instantly driving it brought back so many memories. In fact, to this day, it was in one of these that I've driven the most miles of any car I've ever owned. But then we come to the Vantage Roadster, the Aston Martin 4.7 V8 Vantage Roadster that I bought a couple of months ago, the very car that we first ever called a Shmeemobile here on the channel. When I owned it over a decade ago, having gone 9 years without seeing the car, I managed to track it back down again recently, reacquired it, and also popped back on the famous number plate that used to be on it at the time. And in fact, the Clio is now registered as the same plate that I had on my original Clio way back when as well, over 15 years ago, which is crazy to think. And then of course the ultimate flagship Shmeemobile in many ways, the most powerful and most valuable, with 800 horsepower. We've got 800 horsepower, 420 horsepower, 72 horsepower. Quite the difference. We've got the 7-speed dual clutch, we've got the 6-speed automated manual, we've got the 5-speed manual. We're front-driven, rear-driven, and rear-driven, but three very, very different cars. Twin turbocharged 4-litre V8, 4.7-litre naturally aspirated V8, 1,149cc four-cylinder, but three cars that, like I said, really split down different eras. The Clio for me was my first car, one of these, and it feels so reminiscent. I swear this could be the same car, down to every piece of the specification, the sunroof, the reflective window, the same wheels, the same interior trim. It was this same car, one of the final specifications before the Clio 3 came along. But of course, that freedom that comes with the first car, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this. When you have your first car, it's the first time you can go somewhere on your own, the first time you could go on a road trip, and in fact, that's what the Clio was for me as well. The first time doing anything with that level of freedom. The V8 Vantage was my first serious sports car, the first car that I took to car events, the first car that I revealed to you guys as a Shmeemobile on the channel, the first proper road trips and supercar rallies that I took part in. Then of course the Senna, we can argue back and forth if it is a hypercar or not, but it's the first car with that kind of level of performance that I ever owned, the first car which, to be honest, has scared me on multiple occasions when driving it, given quite how powerful and ridiculously fast it is. And the three here tell a story with the colours as well, having gone from the silver to literally the glacial blue, as Aston Martin call it, this ice silver blue, to the MSO cerulean blue that we have on the Senna, which has become quite a well-known colour along the way, here with the navy walls in the Shmeemuseum as well. But I think first up, I actually want to take out the Clio. We will jump up through the stages and the different driving experiences. So let's come through to here. I think I've got the key on me. I've even put a little 1x1 Rubik's Cube on it. Shouldn't be too hard to solve that one, hey? Anyway, let's come open this up, he says. It helps if I unlock it rather than lock it. Get it started. The cold start in here is not going to be particularly special, but nonetheless, let's start it. Oh yes, and let's go out for a drive. I would imagine that a lot of people think I am moderately crazy for buying the Clio. It certainly stands out a little bit like a sore bum in the collection, but this is about the memories, and I have to be completely honest, when I drove it for the first time away from Dub Customs, it instantly felt like the day that I sold the car in 2008. I say the car, obviously it wasn't this car, but it had only done 60,000 miles, and I had sold mine on about 35,000 miles. So overall, actually pretty similar. Now this seems to be running pretty well, to be honest. I bought the car, of course, through eBay Motors. I've not done any health checks really on it because, truth be told, we're probably going to be changing just about everything, and anything that wasn't in the plans to change, we will quite possibly now change. The engine, the interior, I think visually it will stay looking as it is. Be a bit of a sleeper, a track tool, that kind of idea, perhaps even electric. That's an idea we've been thinking a little bit about as well. Anyway, sleeper track tool is the plan, but driving in it, it brings back all of those memories of the freedom that I had when I had my own car for the first time. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. That's the car which gives you the opportunity to go and visit friends whenever you want if you don't live in the same town, to go travel, to go to events, to go visit things. For me, it meant going to, let's say, car events. It also meant going on my first ever big road trip where we took my one of these, completely loaded it up, and this was with my friends Sam Moores and Benzine Ben, who you might still know to this day as well. We had completely wedged it to the rafters. Sam was sat in the back and in fact had things that had to be piled up on top of him. I even had stuff around here when I was driving just to make sure we could take everything we needed off on this adventure across to France as 18-year-olds in my Clio, and I'll never forget those moments. And just being in here, it feels like that instantly. Being a French hatchback, we have some very soft and comfortable seats. Not gonna lie, they are not, let's say, supportive buckets like we'll find in the McLaren Senna, but that is obviously not what this car is about at all. It has next to no go at all. If you go down second gear, my foot's flat and it's not a problem that we're coming in towards cars that are stopped on the road. Yes, maybe we do actually need to brake. It is really, really busy today, which unfortunately probably means that we've got a traffic jam or something up ahead, which is no good at all. So I might just turn around and go the other way. He says there are cars coming. It's just old school. It was actually really good, I guess, to have electric windows, to have automatic lights and wipers. The spec of this car is actually pretty nice, and the fact that it's so tiny means I can just do this in the road, spin it around, not worry about anything. Yeah, it's definitely a big jam down that way. Go through the bush a little bit. And it's that easy. Unfortunately, we do have a bit of a creaking sunroof, though. I noticed that on the first drive back home, but this is just, my foot's flat, by the way, at 40 miles an hour. Eventually we'll get to 50. And then when you throw it into a corner, you have to be a little bit conscious. I don't know that the suspension components are all good, and it does like to have a bit of body roll, and we are on 4 completely different tyres, although probably at this end of the market that's a bit more normal than I'm used to with the supercar stuff, but you certainly would not want mixed tyres on a supercar, definitely not on the same axle, probably not front to rear either, but it just goes along. It makes next to no noise in the process, but you know what? I don't really care. It's awesome. It reminds me so much of what got me into cars. If I hadn't had one of these back when I did, I wouldn't have got into all of the stuff that I've got into since. This is where it began. I think it tells a big part of the story, certainly a big part of my experiences, and just trundling down a country lane, carefree in the Clio. I'm totally loving it. Back from the first little drive then, and time for a key swap. In fact, from the basic Clio key to the ECU, Aston Martin's emotional control unit, and the V8 Vantage Roadster. Let's come through. We've already got the roof down. Of course, I'm going to keep that down, I think, to enjoy the most of this possible for the moment. The sounds that you get, even the priming sound there, so familiar with this car and all of the mileage I did. We're at 31,400 now. When I bought the car, it was about 3,000. When I sold it, it was about 19,000. So even to this day, I did more than half the mileage in this particular Vantage Roadster. Let's start it up. Such a cool sound. It's such a cool car to drive. Surprisingly comfortable seats in here as well. Not a massive amount of headroom when you've actually got the roof up. But we don't need that today, so let's take it out. Now this is a delight to drive. A balance of power, which means you're not doing silly speeds, but you're having plenty of fun, wind in the hair, bit overcast, probably going to rain shortly, but as long as it isn't, I'm going to enjoy it. And back when I owned this very car for the 2 years I had it the first time around, it was driven with the roof down at every possible opportunity. If it wasn't raining, the roof was down, and I had so many fun adventures with it. Adventures in the Shmeemobile, as we called it, with my friend Alex Smolik, driving over to Paris, going down to Monaco and the south of France. Multiple times, in fact, this car went to Paris, taking part in the Dodgeball Winter Rally back in, I think, 2012. Chasing the Aston Martin 177, in fact, on Gumball that year as well. I'll never forget that, driving over to France and down in towards Paris as well. Just the feeling of it. This car, this engine, the way it goes up through the revs. This was the facelifted V8 Vantage. There was the 4.3 before, then the 4.7, just gave it a little bit more power, updated the interior as well. Slightly different sound. That will never, ever, ever get boring. And driving the car, like I said, it's not the fastest thing in the world, but it doesn't need to be. And the memories for me as well, all of these individual sounds, even if you put the roof up and down, the noise of the motors instantly brings back those memories, because even in this era, doing 16,000 miles with the car was one of the larger counts I've done in any cars that I've owned. The Clio did more than that, my 1 Series did more than that, and the 675 LT Spider has done more than that. So this is the 4th highest mileage I've ever done in a car that's been in my garage. So again, a big part of everything that I guess I've got up to and that I've enjoyed on the road, learning the world of cars, going to so many car events, the Wilton House convoys. Wilton House Supercars was always one of the best events. Meeting with many private supercar clubs and groups for different drives, London Tunnel runs, Boxing Day runs of the Pistonheads groups. Those fun days. Things have changed since then, but back then, yeah, enjoyed it an awful lot. I tell you what this car does need though, is a serious service, tyres, general overhaul, restoration, wheels to have the curbings fixed, and a few things that will just make it that little bit more perfect. So that is definitely on the radar, in the works for the near future. I just wanted to drive it again today, to have these different experiences together, to go from the Clio to the Aston and then into the Senna, which is really the ultimate of the 5 McLarens that I've been fortunate enough to own in the recent years. But this is, for me, one of my favourite things about the Shmuseum and the opportunities is having the cars here and being able to go and drive them, being able to enjoy different experiences for what they are, and to remember, you know, what it's like going from the Clio through to the Senna, to have those different all-around, Taycan silently goes past, all-around experiences, to use the word again. That is literally what it is. Anyway, let's head on back and go swap to the Senna. The feeling of the open roads. I hope it's not been too windy in here, but for me, driving roof down, there's nothing quite like it. This is the perfect car. Obviously, if you want ultimate performance, you want a fixed roof. But if you want to go and enjoy a countryside road, this is the best. This is the absolute best. And you very quickly forget that the shifts on this are not the fastest in the world. It is an automated manual. It is not a dual clutch. It's time then to change from one blue Shmeemobile to another blue Shmeemobile. Very different eras of my own experiences. We've gone from one car to one that's worth probably 40-ish times the price, and then up another 15, 20 times. Very, very different game when it comes to a car like the McLaren Senna. And in fact, I think the two keys for these two actually tell a fair bit of the story. The elegance of the crystal key for the Vantage Roadster, the very small, lightweight carbon fibre style that you have for the McLaren Senna. This is literally the closest thing that you can find to a stripped out, nonsensical, lightweight race car for the road, but wearing number plates. Until the arrival of the Aston Martin Valkyrie, this is the least sanitized road car that has ever existed. 800 horsepower, only 1,200 kilos, totally mental aerodynamics, active aero flaps inside the front, all of these openings and extra gurney flaps, the smooth air over the bridge across the top for the cool air that goes in towards the engine bay back here, even the gurneys on the rear arches that help with the extraction of air here, the massive spoiler, the central exhaust, everything about this is mental. The doors, which of course open upwards and outwards. This is, as I said earlier, not my first McLaren. It followed the line of the 12C, the 650S, LT Coupe and LT Spider that I've had, the LT Spider that I still have, but this is by far the most extreme. It is a completely different ball game in every possible way. The McLaren Senna, every time I drive it, is quite the event, but I think it becomes even more special having just driven these and had those different types of experiences to now get into this and to take this for a quick run. So let's come through and get this started. It actually doesn't sound as good as the Vantage, to be completely honest. It's not quite the same raspiness with the twin turbos and with the OPF and muffler, of course, on the exhaust. Then just over 3,000 miles in here. We will hit the button once. We're currently in race mode. It lets you know about that every time. We've got a service coming up as well. And the tyre pressures are low. They're not actually low, they're just at the bottom of what you should do. Let's get it started. Sounds very raw, very aggressive. We are going to need to take it out of race mode though, to go out on the road. So to do that, I actually need to close down the door, shut that. We will, as this says, press active to cancel. Race mode deactivation takes a moment for that process to run. We don't want all of these tyre pressure warnings. As you can see, it raises up the suspension front and rear. It just looks infinitely cool when it's parked down in the race mode setting. Just the longer it's been sat down for, the longer it then takes to lift it back up. New cars, hey, technology, complicated. Imagine the amount of tech in every element of this compared to the Clio. Probably this central screen has more tech in it than the whole Clio does. ECUs and the whole works. Let alone when you get into hydraulic suspension and all of the clever traction control and driving dynamics modes and everything that you can change and play with in this. This is actually taking a surprisingly long time to deactivate from race mode. You can see why we just leave it down. Oh, there we go. It's sped up towards the end. Right, let's take this out and go drive. My goodness, it is easy to forget how ridiculously raw the McLaren Senna is, and this is in complete normal driving at the moment. It bounces over the bumps, you feel every vibration, you hear every single sound of the stones pinging off the tub. If we go into active dynamics, we then have it in manual, we can go into ESC dynamic as well, loosen up the traction control a little bit. The swooshes, the sounds, the feeling, it's all around you. This car is the ultimate experience and event. And you see, sorry, I said the word experience a lot of times today. I hope you're not playing the experience drinking game, we could say. Anyway, it's everything. As a car, it's so involving. The shifts are instant, of course, instant. The gearbox just goes straight from first to second to third. There's infinitely more power and torque than you could ever possibly want out of the car. Honestly, every time I get back into this, I have to pinch myself a little bit of, is this actually my car? I feel a little bit like it's a test drive in a press car or a factory car or something, but somehow it's in my garage and it's so silly fast, absolutely silly. Just drop it down the gears. Of course, I've had some fun with it at the Nürburgring, at Spa. As a road car, it makes very little sense. Honestly, you wonder why you're even bothering to drive it in this kind of environment sometimes, because it doesn't like this. It doesn't like going slowly. It bounces over the bumps, particularly with our horrible country lanes that we have here. It makes limited sense. But then when you do get those moments of unleashing it, you start to be so absorbed in everything that the car is doing and telling you that it all makes sense and it all gives you a reward that's just out of this world. It's hard to explain how much the sound in here takes over everything. It's not screamy and shouty in the way that the Black Series cars, the SLS and the C63 are, or even the GT8, for example, but it's so loud and just all around you. It's savage. This car is absolutely savage. We've got a couple of cyclists and things out on the roads today. So yes, it's a gentle drive, but honestly, it's a surreal situation. I feel very lucky, so thank you everybody who's part of this journey, because to drive from the Clio to the Vantage to the Senna today is actually, I think, a big moment of reflection, a big moment of realizing how crazy this journey's been. I'm sorry, I'm struggling to put it in words, but all I can say is thank you for being part of it. Everybody who's supported this since the first videos, where actually at the time I had a 1 Series. I had done some videos with my Clio, but they were never really on the channel in that way. Obviously the Vantage was a big thing back at the time, and the Senna arrived 2.5 years ago, and it's just a bizarre world and a bizarre level of performance that it offers and makes possible, and those moments at the Nürburgring and on the Autobahn, having flames firing out the back at 200 and whatever miles an hour on the German Autobahns at night, all the way through to going down to Supercar Owners Circle in Switzerland. Just some very, very good times, to be honest, driving in this car with the road opening up again here. Yeah, you have to be very aware, especially on these bumpy roads. It's one of the things you experience with this car is like this, at 60 miles an hour at the speed limit, you hit any bumps and it's set up so aggressively with the camber that it just wants to pull all over the place, which is obviously far from ideal for having a smooth drive. It's not about having a smooth drive. A long journey is exhausting, it is hard work, but when you're in the right place, there's nothing else quite like a McLaren Senna. Back in, and this time with the car parked at the normal ride height as opposed to down in race mode. So you can see it sits noticeably taller at the front, the splitter is higher off the ground, you've got bigger arch gaps, makes it a little bit more usable, but doesn't quite look as cool, of course, as a result. It's about 3.5 centimeters taller at the front, 2.5 or so at the back. But amusingly, you will spot the trail of water that follows the route I took out of the garage when I departed, which is a trait of the Senna. The aero is so complex, and all of these different parts within the bodywork effectively hold water in them when you've washed it. The car was cleaned up yesterday, and it still had some water in the bodywork, and it's just one of those things you get used to with this, particularly the front splitter. If you don't dry it out, it basically becomes a little paddling pool up there. It holds a lot of water. But with these 3 cars, what different cars to drive, what different feelings, different emotions, different periods of my car ownership history, as I said earlier, from effectively the first car, close enough, that freedom, and I don't think I'd ever been as excited. I don't think even to this day I have ever been as excited as my first ever car and the first time doing everything. Then equally, taking delivery of the Vantage Roadster, which I think off the top of my head was probably the 5th car I had ever owned, but the first of this nature, the first car that opened so many opportunities in terms of keeping me very busy, but also obviously the early days of the Shmee 150 channel. The car that in so many ways was responsible for everything that's now here as part of the Shmeemobile collection, which is crazy to say. And then of course the Senna, which I think is era defining really. I think in the future, these are going to be cars that really stand out. The McLaren Senna was, or is, let's say, the fastest car probably ever around a racetrack, but also road homologated without electrical assistance, so a non-hybrid or an EV. It's so quick, I don't think that's ever going to be beaten without electrical assistance in terms of setting lap times for a road car, which is, as odd as it sounds, what so much of it is all about really. Obviously race cars are faster, but there's something slightly less relatable about an actual race car. It's an odd one. But for me, driving those 3 today has been really quite a cool and fun thing to do. Something a bit random, but after picking up the Clio, something I really wanted to do, Clio and Senna, I just decided to throw the Vantage into the mix because of how they really stack up as 3 different cars here in the garage. Total extremes, hey? Clio to McLaren Senna, as I said, probably the first time a 2005 Mark II Clio has been in a group test with a McLaren Senna. But again, thank you very much to all of you for your support. Thank you for being part of the Shmee150 journey. I've now got a busy trip coming right up with some more things I'm looking forward to sharing. Thank you very much, guys. Your support is hugely appreciated. That's it for this time, though, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers.